The dense forest loomed before them, an endless sea of green stretching as far as the eye could see. Sarah and Mark had been hiking for hours following a trail that promised them to a hidden waterfall deep in the heart of the woods. But as they walked deeper into the forest, Sarah's excitement began to give way to a growing sense of unease. The trees seemed to close around them, their thick branches blocking out the sun and casting the forest floor into shadow. Mark noticed the change in Sarah's demeanor and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Don't worry," he said with a smile. "We're almost there." After a few more minutes of walking, Sarah's nerves began to settle, and she took a deep breath of the fresh forest air. Mark noticed the change in her demeanor and gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, Sarah," he said, "I've been on this trail before and there's nothing to be afraid of." Sarah nodded, grateful for her brother's comforting words. They continued on deeper into the woods, the trees growing thicker around them as they walked. Mark pointed out the different plants and animals, teaching Sarah about the natural world around them. Sarah was glad they had decided to take this hike. It felt good to spend time with her brother and escape from the stresses of day-to-day life. Suddenly, a loud screech pierced through the peaceful sounds of the forest. Mark and Sarah both froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. The sound was unlike anything they had heard before, and it made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. They looked at each other, their eyes wide with fear. Mark took a step forward, trying to identify the source of the noise, when they heard it, again, even louder this time. Sarah grabbed her brother's arm, her hand shaking. "Mark, what was that?" she whispered. Mark's expression was tense, but he tried remaining calm for Sarah's sake. "I don't know, Sarah," he said, "but we should probably start heading back." Mark and Sarah stumbled around in the woods, searching for a way out, but to no avail. The darkness was closing in quickly, and the only sound they could hear was the pounding of their hearts. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, and Mark's nerves were frayed. They tried to retrace their steps, but everything looked the same, and they couldn't find any landmarks to guide them. Fear had taken hold of them, and they had no idea what was waiting for them in the shadows. As Mark and Sarah stumbled around in the darkness, desperately searching for a way out of the woods, the terrifying screech echoed through the trees again. It was louder this time, closer. Sarah felt a wave of panic wash over her, and she took a deep breath and tried to calm herself down. She reminded herself that she had been on this trail before and that she knew the way. She also knew the beauty of her surroundings and focused on her senses to ground herself. Then, she continued down the trail, feeling more confident and in control of her emotions. Mark, walking ahead of her, suddenly stops to look back at her. He asks if she's okay. Sarah assures him, she is okay. Mark seems to calm down after hearing his sister is okay, but still can't figure out why he is lost. He's been down this way before. Mark and Sarah had been walking for hours, enjoying the serene beauty of the forest around them. As they reached the end of the path, they suddenly realized they had hit a dead end. Turning around to retrace their steps, they were startled by a sudden, ear-piercing screech that echoed throughout the forest. Frozen in fear, they slowly turned to face the source of the sound, and there it was. Standing only 10 feet away from them was this bizarre creature that seemed to look and move like a lizard but had a rotten fur-like substance on its head and back. Sarah's heart sunk to the ground in complete shock as she stared eye to eye with the creature. Mark, already looking for an escape, spotted a path leading up to a steep, dark hill. Without even checking if Sarah was in shock, he grabbed her, slung her over his shoulder, and darted for the steep hill, not looking back. Mark, who was hoisting Sarah over his shoulder while running up the steep hill, suddenly started having flashbacks of when he and his father hiked this area, enjoying the scenery. During that hike, Mark's father suddenly hoisted him over his shoulders and ran through the woods in panic. Mark suddenly snapped back to reality when he heard the trees behind him rattling and crackling, but upon seeing the top of the hill, he went into complete focus. When Mark was completely focused, he realized that he could no longer hear the crackling of the trees breaking behind him or the creature screeching. He could only hear his heart beating faster and faster. He felt a surge of adrenaline course through his veins as he pushed himself to the limit, his breathing becoming more and more labored with each step. He could feel the sweat dripping down his forehead, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to be shaking with each stride. He was so close to the top of the hill, he was determined to make it. With one final burst of energy, he made it to the top, feeling a sense of accomplishment and pride. Reaching the top of the hill, Mark experienced a sudden, powerful moment that ended when he realized he had gotten himself deeper into the woods. Looking out onto the horizon, he could see nothing but trees. "I've been on this trail many times with Dad, so how could I get lost? The woods were never this big." Mark more frustrated. How could this be? This is unreal. A big monster? The woods, expanding to the size of the Amazon? This makes no sense. As Mark gazed upon the never-ending woods, he suddenly remembered the bizarre creature that had been chasing him earlier. He quickly glanced down the hill, but nothing was there. The trees were back to normal, as if the chase never happened. "What the hell?" Mark said. "How could this be? I heard the trees breaking, the ground shaking. How could this be?" After snapping back to reality, Mark remembers that Sarah was on his shoulders. He thought it was crazy that he had forgotten she was there. He felt strong and invincible in that moment. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I forgot I was carrying you. Are you okay?" However, there was no response from Sarah, and she remained still, whispering to herself like a disturbed individual. Mark pulled Sarah off his shoulders and shook her, saying, "Sarah, snap out of it. We made it to the top of the hill. I think. It seems the forest got even bigger." As Mark and Sarah made their way deeper into the forest, the air grew thick with an eerie silence. But just as they began to let their guard down, a rustling in the underbrush caught their attention, and they froze, heartbeats pounding in their chests. The rustling grew louder and more frenzied, as if something was circling them. Mark and Sarah's flashlights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the twisted trees. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, and they realized they were not alone in the forest. Mark and Sarah froze in terror, their hearts pounding in their chests. They tried to shine their flashlights in the direction of the scream, but the beams seemed to disappear into the darkness. Then, they heard a loud growl, and the rustling grew even louder. With each passing moment, the circling became tighter and more frenzied. Just as Mark and Sarah thought they were done for, the noise abruptly stopped, and the forest fell completely silent. But was the danger really gone, or were they just about to face an even greater threat?